Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Jon, pastor at Carmel Church, and I'm here with Rusten, as always, my sidekick, my partner in crime. How you doing, Rusten?
Doing good. It is Monday, but it is a Sunday Monday. A sunny Monday.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I got these windows in my home office that are just blazing light in here. It's great.
That's nice. My window shades are down, so I have no idea what it looks like outside right now. Unfortunately.
I find a lot of encouragement with any light that comes in my office, so.
Yeah. It looks weird if people look in and I'm like talking to them.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I have to lock the door so kids don't interrupt, but other than that, it's pretty good.
Yeah, and you're detached from your house, aren't you?
Yeah, detached, yeah.
You have that cool, is it a garage? A whole garage with an office? Or
yeah,
is it
it's
an
a
office?
garage that has an office. It's like they're not, like the garage and office are not connected. There's a office and then there's a shared wall that has a garage on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm jealous.
Yeah. It is a nice setup to be able to just come out here and be disconnected, but also get to work from home on Mondays.
On Mondays.
Yes.
It is Monday.
Yes, it is.
With that, you want to just dive in?
Yeah, for sure.
So I get to ask you the questions this time because you preached on Romans 12, and it's kind of interesting because we went into Easter. So we had 3 weeks going into Easter where we weren't in Romans, and then we had Easter, which was the fourth week, and then we had a 3-week series on biblical financial stewardship, just 7 weeks. So it was 2 months ago that we were in the book of Romans.
Yes.
Which is a long time.
It felt like when I was preparing for Romans 12, I was like, okay, where are we at?
Yeah. Which is a good question, actually. The first thing I thought it'd be good to talk through is Romans 12 is different from the first 11 chapters. So you kind of talk about what's happening in Romans, what's been going on in Romans 1 through 11, and how is 12, and really 12 to the end of the book, it's different. So we could talk about that difference and why it matters.
For sure. Well, it's easy to oversimplify it, but it's also helpful to oversimplify it, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times what you'll hear, and I think this is generally true in a simplified way, that the first 11 chapters are really dealing with like foundational, what you might call indicatives of the gospel. Like, this is what the gospel is. This is what the gospel it has done. And I think there's a lot of implications of that have to, this is where it's easy to oversimplify, but there's a lot of implications with that, with just what the people of God actually is, right? Like, that's why the whole Jew-Gentile thing is such a big deal as well, because we need to establish, like, who are the people of God with an indicative statement, right?
Yeah.
But then, the first 11 chapters are indicative, and then meaning they're just statements of what the gospel is, the foundational truths of the gospel. And then from 12 on, a lot of people will say that that's where you get these gospel imperatives, like what is the life that then flows out of, is built on top of this gospel foundation. And I think that I think it's oversimplified, because I think there's a lot of things even in Romans 12 that are actually like in Romans 6, for instance, like, because of the gospel, thus, don't live as a slave to sin, stuff like that, right? But I think that that's generally true in terms of the emphasis of what Paul is actually saying in these sections. But so there's a transition where it says, "Therefore, by the mercies of God." Or actually, it's depending on which translation. It's by the mercies of God. Therefore, I appeal to you.
Yeah. I remember way back in the day hearing R.C. Sproul. I think even maybe you said something about some of the sermon that he was like, whenever you go to therefore, you have to ask, what's the therefore?
Yeah, exactly. And I was like,
which is kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it is kind of cheesy, but it's also really like just basic interpretive. Important question to ask, especially when you've taken that weeks long break from the text. Like, okay, there's a therefore, we have to kind of say, what is that? What is he building upon, right?
Yeah.
And I think he's building. A lot of people will say, the therefore is looking back at the immediate context, but in this instance, most people will say he's actually building upon the entirety of the letter up until this point, because there's such a shift in emphasis on the actual like pastoral concerns about how the life of the church actually functions. So that's the flavor of Romans 12 on, is very much on what does it look like when the gospel hits, the rubber hits the road with the gospel with a people, right? A people and how they relate to one another, a people and how they relate to the world around them, and so that seems to be a pretty fair way of looking at the first 11 versus the 12 to 16.
For sure. One of the things that I think is important to kind of note is that I think some people just want to focus on Romans 12 through the end, right? And you just have Christian ethics, right? These imperatives that you just need to live this certain way and do these certain things. And then you've got another group of people that are prone to say, just doctrine and theology, just have the right doctrine and theology. And Paul is kind of refuting both of those by saying Christian ethic or Christian, conduct or living flows out of Christian doctrine.
Yes.
And Paul isn't like categorically changing the topic by going from justification by faith alone and by works of the law no one will be justified, and the Spirit of God, being baptized into the death and resurrection of Christ. He's not categorically changing the topic. He's saying these things which are true. These things are objectively true. Work themselves out in these practical ways in the life of the church, and you can't have theology or doctrine or ethics. It's doctrine and ethics and Christian ethics and living that flows out of the doctrine that we profess to believe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they are two parts of the same plant, like root and stock, root and fruit. You can't have one without the other, or you shouldn't, have one without the other. Like, that was never in God's design. Like, redemption is not just what we're saved from, but what we're saved for. There's very much that's a key thing. And I mean, this is something that's not just Romans. This is everywhere. Right? This is everywhere.
Yeah.
I always think about Philippians and how there's this admonition to, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel, right? Let your life actually flow from the gospel you ostensibly believe in and put your trust in, right? There's a life that the gospel is good news, but it's a good news that is life changing and is transformative.
Absolutely. Yeah. You see that pattern throughout Paul's writing Colossians.
Yes.
You've got like just clarifying theology of the gospel and then applying it pertaining to like religious ceremonies and ceremonial law and putting off and putting on. Ephesians is the same way. You've got 3 chapters. Ephesians is kind of like a distilled Romans, if you will.
Yeah.
Where you have 3 chapters of just really, really rich theology, and then you have 3 chapters of really intense, here's how you ought to live in light of that truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. He gets real. It is more distilled in Ephesians, and yet he unpacks like the household codes more than he does in Romans. For instance, there's a just a crucial thing that Paul's after, and it's very contrary to, like, I think about you said the doctrine only guys versus the works only guys. It's very contrary to the antinomian spirit that is just looking for the gospel to believe, and then anytime it sees something that the word or Christ requires of us, it goes, oh, that's Christ died to save me from doing that, right? Nope.
Yeah, exactly. So, what? It's a long chapter. You had a lot of text to cover that day. 21 verses, and it's not just that it's long; it's that in those 21 verses, Paul is covering quite a bit of ground. Could you maybe offer just like a summary of what are some of the big things
Yeah.
that he's hitting off?
Yeah.
And then how are those things connected to Romans 1 through 11?
Okay. Part 1, the summary, and then we'll try to come back to part 2, connected to
Yeah.
Romans 1 through 11. So there's kind of 3 big. You have, when you're preaching a text like this, you kind of have to just like, okay, we're just going to take them in chunks. These are the chunks, and because especially in this text, he does this like machine gun thing where he's just like, and this, do this, like it's just a list. It gets pretty listy, and so to unpack each one of those things would have taken a lot longer than one sermon. But the 3 big categories were like, just a general, what is the life. No, the gospel calls us to a life of devotion and worship to God. That's being called to be a living sacrifice. We're living our life upon the altar. All of our life is to be lived to extol the glory of the one who purchased us with his blood. Right? That's kind of the big category, and underneath that one category is like, so thus be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Like you used to have this old way of thinking that was, back when you did not belong to Christ. You actually need to put that way of thinking to death and be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Apply the gospel to your mind so that now you are you're not thinking in those patterns of idolatry. You're not looking for validation where there is not to be validation found. You're not looking for hope in the promises of false gods. Like, put all those things to death. Have your mind be transformed by the renewal of your mind, which is the truth, according to the truth of the gospel, the truth of who God is and what he's done for you, all those things. So I see those 2 things as together, like this life of a living sacrifice. The only way you live upon the altar is if you're transformed and by the renewal of your mind, right? You used to live on the, maybe on the altar of idols, right? And now you need to be transformed so that you no longer live and think that way. The engine of your life was following a certain God, one of the myriad we invent. And now by the gospel, you no longer are a slave to a false god, an idol. You are, and they demand so much of you, and they never deliver any of the promises. But God has given everything to you, and now He requires of you praise and thanksgiving, right? So.
Yeah.
That's the first one, devotion, a whole life devotion. Then the second one is like he just quickly transitions to like the life of the people of God, right? And he gives a list of first an admonition to be humble, to like consider yourself with sober judgment, right? In light of the gospel, consider who you are with sober judgment, with humility, and in that humility, serve the body. And he lists a whole bunch of different ways that you serve the body.
Yeah.
And then this one kind of, and with serving the body and serving the body of Christ and loving those that Christ has purchased, he also, he calls that love to be genuine. And then he transitions toward the end of like talking about love in general, the affections, and specifically about loving the people of God, but also loving loving your enemies, basically, right? And there's a conduct befitting to loving your enemies, and within that he talks about what to not to revile in return for being. It's very similar to Peter, not returning reviling for reviling, and not executing vengeance on behalf of yourself, but instead leaving that to God. And so there's like a love your enemy, but also like trust God that He's going to deal with your enemies appropriately. Right.
Which is why you can love your enemy.
Which is why you can't. It frees you to love your enemy, because if you think that you're the judge, jury, and executioner, you're going to, you're not going to love your enemy. Right? You can leave it to God, and thus you can love them. Yeah.
Right.
So, I summed it up as like devotion, unity within the body, and then love, and the love for the people of God and for the outside. Mm-hmm. So those are the those big categories. Then how do they
categories?
Yes.
How do they connect to Romans 1 through 11?
So Romans 1 through 11, first, I kind of hinted at this already, but like, if the gospel is true, that Christ has justified us, and God has poured out His love for us in Christ, and there's no condemnation for anyone in Christ because Christ was condemned on our behalf. What do we owe God now? Like, we owe Him our all. Like, He's purchased us, and so that devotion is not one that is arbitrary. It's fitting. It is rational, you might even say. Like, it's fitting to what we've actually received, right? If we received the grace that has saved us from death, and at the cost of the blood of Christ and the life of Christ, then it ought to be a joy to give our lives to Him, right? So that's the first one. Now the second one, gospel unity. I mean, this is coming up a lot in Romans 1 through 11 with dealing with the Jew-Gentile distinction, right? That's kind of his big paradigm he's dealing with. Like, the Jews wanted to look down on the Gentiles because they didn't have X, Y, Z. They didn't have all the things that they had. But Paul's like tearing that down the whole time, and like, you guys both are. No one is righteous, no, not one. All of you are just as needy for the gospel as anybody. And so, if you kind of apply that general truth, that's the distinction between Jew and Gentile, that's really true about everybody. Like, we're all here on the same ticket, and it's not anything we did. It's completely on the ticket of what Christ did for us. And so that ought to inform how we think of ourselves and how we think of others, and it ought to inspire humility. We ought to be living in harmony with one another, because we're all remembering, like, no one is here because they're awesome. Everyone's here because they were purchased by the blood of Christ. Yeah. So, and then the let love be genuine. That particular line where he says, "Let love be genuine," it feels like it kind of flows out of even the devotion piece, because he's calling for not just, he's calling for actions, of course, but he's calling for a heart change towards each other. Right? An actual affection that we have for one another, a genuine affection that kind of flows out of this this love that we've received. Like, we only love because He first loved us, right? And so, and then that ought, if we remember that we were enemies and Christ died for us while we were yet enemies, then we have an opportunity to, walk in His footsteps and love our enemies. And so, think about Romans 3 in light of, the end of Romans 12. It's like, okay, no one is righteous, no, not one. And, and then Romans where it talks about how while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. Then, like, think about, now, how are you supposed to live with your unbelieving neighbor who's also a jerk, right?
Yeah.
And then, and there's a lot of this. It's interesting. A lot of this Romans 12 reminds me of like the mirror image of Romans 1, right? Like, Romans 1 is giving this picture of like fallen humanity, and how they're just given over to their lusts, and and that's destructive, and their minds are futile, right? And there's like and they're malicious towards each other. And Romans 12 seems like it's like that's what it's like when Romans 1 is what it's like when you have you exchange the glory of God for worshiping idols, and then Romans 12 is like, this is what it looks like to be redeemed, right?
Yeah. When I was going through that, when we did the study guides, I think that's where I went, because Romans 1 lists how we rebel against God with our bodies.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And Romans 12 is talking about how we honor God with our bodies. How the use of the body is changed. Right.
Yes.
So, but that word love there, I wanted to ask you, like, love is a word that gets stolen all the time, right? And so there's the exhortation here in verse 9 to let love be genuine. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, maybe you could talk about what are maybe some of the differences between love as it's described in Romans 12 and love as it's often presented from the world.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with the world.
That's a big question.
Yeah. Let's start with the world. Love in the kind of like dictionary of the world is more about self-expression, right? And it's interesting because this is where like the genuine thing has to be unpacked, because like love is like whatever gives you, you know, kind of like good feelings, right? And so it's very and authenticity is really important for the world, right? And so
that's what I was thinking.
The feelings of love are more about what the self experiences as love, what we resonate with as love. And so that because of that, it's very like fleeting. It's not necessarily according to any design that God has in mind for us. So I think about like, you know, the love is love thing, or love wins thing with the whole like gay marriage thing. Well, what is that? It's like somebody has strong feelings towards something that is against God's design, and that feeling is just defined as love because, you know, it's a strong admiration and affection, but it's not necessarily one that's based on what we would say like the definition of love is, right? So there's so it's like the love has, you know, a expressionary, feelings-based understanding of love that is not based in any standard, right?
Yeah, and along with that, you know, with that definition, to love your neighbor is basically to celebrate and endorse whatever your neighbor loves.
Yes.
Right? Which is really interesting because if we were doing that, the lines about enemies wouldn't make any sense here.
Yeah, exactly.
Romans 12,
yeah.
right?
It's interesting. A lot of times people say love your enemies, but what they really mean is like just don't have any enemies. Like when they're trying to take that line from the Bible and apply it today, it's like, no, we actually do have enemies. We're called to love them. If you didn't have enemies, how would we do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because there's disagreements and there's conflict over the truth, right?
Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got kind of self-expression, the desire, the pursuit of desires, and authenticity coming from the world, and affirmation of whatever somebody wants. But it says, "Love be genuine." How is that different?
Yeah.
What is genuine love? Maybe that's a good way to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let love. So there's a couple angles here that I think are important, like to think through. One is that I think when, like, if you think about like let love be genuine, you know, like he follows that immediately by saying, "Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good." Right?
Yes.
So a love that is genuine is one that is living within God's standards of good and evil. Right? A love that is a genuine love seeks the true good of your neighbor, right? It doesn't just puff your neighbor up and affirm your neighbor in their evil or their destructive behavior. So I think there's that. But at the same time, when he says let love be genuine, like I think a little bit about some of the. I'm thinking about the call to have a heart that is not just paying lip service. You know what I mean? I think there's that too. So this is where the authenticity thing is like, there's something true about we ought to have authentic, genuine love, but it's not authenticity for authenticity's sake, right?
Yeah.
I'm authentically an awful sinner. Like just truly, right? So authenticity isn't the problem. The problem is that I ought to have a heart that is genuinely caring and has genuine affection for my neighbor, right? Yeah. I ought to. Yeah. The ought there is so contrary to our world's understanding of authenticity, right? Like so to say let love be genuine, I think is like saying, you know, let that love like truly reside in you, the love of Christ truly reside in you and flow out of you to your neighbor, right?
Yes.
And it can't do that without actually having affection for your neighbor and caring for them, because that's what Christ's love did for us, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's like the love is genuine in terms that it actually flows from your heart.
Yes.
But it's genuine also in the sense that it's conformed to God's love.
100%. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the definition. That's the standard. And so if we have a love that genuinely comes from our heart, that doesn't look anything like God's love, which I think that's what he says, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. That's God's love.
Yeah.
If we don't have that kind of love, then it doesn't matter that it's authentic. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
genuine because it's not actually love.
Yeah. It's not love. It's counterfeit. It's a idolatrous counterfeit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about the heaping coals.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I went through this, I read probably many of the same commentaries you did, and I just thought every explanation just wasn't really helpful. And then you said something on Sunday, and I was like, well, duh, of course that's the right thing. So I wanted you to kind of unpack that a little bit, and then I'll maybe make some comments about why I think you're spot on in that application or that explanation of it. So tell us about the heaping burning coals. Verse 20, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you will heap burning coals on his head.
Yes.
Just
I know.
what you always wanted, right?
I know. When I used to read that as a kid, I was like, oh, God's like trying to motivate us to be kind by like having this ulterior motive of like, yeah, we're going to get him good with this kindness.
It'll make him miserable.
I'm going to kill him with kindness, literally, Yeah. No, so
yes. Maybe it was a cold day.
Yeah. So the commentaries are kind of all over the place on this, and this is one of those areas where the commentaries are looking a lot at like what, was there any historical examples of people using the coal language like anywhere in the first century or whatever that might help us understand what's going on here. And you get some interesting ideas like some pagan practice where people would put like a pan of coals on their head to kind of like I guess as a reprimand for their shame or something like that. I don't know. It got weird in some of the commentaries, but the two basic ideas are either the ones that you'll see in the commentaries are either that by being kind you will give God more reason to punish them harsher, right? So that's the coals, right? And then the other one is that by heaping coal, by being kind, you will I guess contribute to something that and this is where the whole like pan on your head like a shame, like it's a shaming thing. You'll contribute to something that will cause them shame over their sin and I hopefully lead them to repent. Right? So the coals is like, oh, I have this like shame on my head and I want to it's making me realize my sin so that maybe I turn from it. Right. So
I like the second of those options better.
Yeah, the second of those options is better, and I mean, and we've probably even experienced that. So there's some like experiential things going on there too. Like, when you are being a jerk and someone's nice to you, you realize, oh dang, like, well, I'm being a jerk, So
yeah.
Those are the two. But in the
that's not where you landed.
No, yeah, in the context of Romans 12, which is all about living your life in worship to God, being a living sacrifice. I just thought that burning coals analogy, like whatever he's doing with burning coals, should be read in light of the living sacrifice. Coals are things that you put on the altar. To be a living sacrifice means you're living your life upon the altar. And so, I thought about Romans 8 and how the language about more than conquerors, and I think it was John Piper once said that like, what does it mean to be more than a conqueror? It means that your enemy actually ends up serving your good, right?
Yeah.
And there's something similar I think going on here, which is that when your enemy, when you are kind to your enemy, you are transforming that engagement, that relationship from one of like antagonist. Someone merely being about the enemy versus you to like, no, this is actually an opportunity to offer to Christ the living like praise, to offer him So the head of my enemy, when I give him a drink when he's a jerk, becomes the altar that I then offer Christ-like aromas to God, because that's what, Christ was kind to his enemies. He loved enemies. He died for enemies. Yeah. So when I offer my enemy a drink, I am putting coals on his head, as it were, as in the form of an offering to God, right? In preparing this act of mercy as an offering to God.
Yeah.
So that seemed to make sense to me.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And you mentioned something about every time we have conflict, or every time somebody opposes us, or we face our enemy, or does us harm, that's an altar moment.
Yes.
Where that's an opportunity for us to make a sacrifice to God. And when you said that, and I went back and looked at it, like the way, I don't know how you like approach a particular text, but when I look at a text, I'm often like thinking about what question or what problem is the author trying to resolve. So in the next episode, we'll talk about Romans 13, and I think Paul is asking, what's our responsibility to the law, to the governing authorities, and he's answering that. And I get the sense that Romans 12, it's like we know what happens with the temple in the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
The temple is, well, Christ is the temple. He was torn down. He was raised on the third day, and now by the Spirit we become the temple, and God is building us together. We know that. Well, what becomes of the high priest? Well, Christ is our high priest, and he intercedes, and we get to enter. We have all these typological things fulfilled. I wonder if the question is, what happens to the sacrifice?
Yeah.
Because we have all these sacrifices being made under the old covenant, and then all of those point to Christ, and Christ is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, and that sacrifice is made. But what does sacrifice look like under the new covenant? And the answer is, well, your enemies and your neighbor are the altar that you lay down your life as a sacrifice for. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that's
in
good.
The new covenant.
Yeah, no, I think Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I thought the way that you did that, it made sense of like not just that verse. It made sense of like, oh, clearly that's what this chapter is about. And I think it's a kind of we both like Peter Lightheart and James Jordan.
Totally.
And I think there's something here about how you interpret the Bible and how you read the Bible and how you can miss things, the commentators, like what you said, like in the first century, was there anybody that was, walking around with coals on their head, right? That's the first question that they ask. And I think people like Lightheart and James Jordan teach us to ask a different question.
Yeah,
that is,
for sure.
What are coals for in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
And when you ask that question and you look at the first line is about a living sacrifice. Right?
Yeah.
If you're thinking about living sacrifices and coals, you don't have to think very long to be like, oh, that's an altar.
Yes.
That's where a sacrifice to God is made. And I think that really honors the text.
And it's not putting coals in his pockets. It's going on top of his head too. Like it's like, it's like it's the top. That's where the coals go.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So, all right. Any other thoughts on Romans 12?
No, I think there's a good segue in Romans 12 into Romans 13, which I think is good to make a connection for before we head into it. But where he says basically, leave it to the wrath of God when not avenging yourself, but leaving it to the wrath of God. And a lot of people read that without reading Romans 13, where it's like 10 verses later, he brings up the wrath of God again in light of the civil magistrates. So you have to join us, I guess, next time for the next episode to unpack more of that connection.
Sounds good. Right. You want to send us out?
Yeah, I'll send us out. Everybody, thanks for checking out Sermon B-Sides again. My name is Rusten, and this is John, and we're so thankful you guys checking us out. And until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.